The mansion was quiet except for the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the long, polished hallways. Outside, the sun had just started to rise, spilling golden light across the tall gates and manicured gardens. Inside, however, tension filled the air. In the grand study at the center of the house, a large, intimidating safe stood silently against the wall. It wasn't just any safe. This safe held papers and secrets that were worth more than anyone could imagine. Its contents were so important that the Mafia boss, a man feared and respected in the city, had tried to keep it under lock and key with the most advanced security. For weeks, 25 experts had been called to try and open the safe. Each of them was considered a master in their field. Some were brilliant engineers, others were experienced locksmiths, and a few were even former spies. They had tools, gadgets, and techniques that most people couldn't even imagine. Every single one of them had tried, and every single one had failed. Some had given up in frustration. Others had worked for hours trying to solve the puzzle, only to leave with empty hands. The Mafia boss grew angrier with every failure. He paced back and forth in his leather chair, his hands folded behind his back, his eyes fixed on the safe. His face was stern and cold, but underneath it, there was unease. The documents inside were too important to risk losing or letting fall into the wrong hands. His reputation, his business, and even the safety of those around him depended on this safe being opened, but only by someone capable and trustworthy. In the corner of the room, sitting quietly and unnoticed, was a young maid. She had been working in the mansion for a few months now. She had always been careful, keeping the floors clean, dusting the shelves, and tidying up rooms. Most of the time, she went about her work silently, unseen by anyone except the head of the household. She had no special training in locks or security systems, and no one expected her to be able to do anything important in this room. Yet, her eyes were sharp, and her mind was always alert. The experts moved around the safe, measuring it, touching it, listening to it, turning dials, pressing buttons, and using every trick they knew. They had charts, laptops, and even small cameras to check inside. But the safe refused to give up its secrets. Hours passed and frustration grew. Some experts argued with each other, blaming one another for mistakes. Some sighed deeply and leaned against the walls, shaking their heads in disbelief. Each failure seemed to make the Mafia boss more tense. He ran his fingers through his hair and muttered to himself, occasionally casting a sharp look at the experts. The maid watched all of this silently, holding a duster in her hands. She didn't say a word. She didn't even move closer at first. She just watched how the experts handled the safe, how they got frustrated, how they overlooked tiny details, and how they relied too much on tools and too little on observation. She noticed patterns that no one else seemed to notice. A small scratch on the corner of the safe, a tiny dent near the lock, a slight misalignment in the metal panel. Details so small that most people would have ignored them. Yet her mind remembered them all. Hours turned into the afternoon, and still no progress had been made. The Mafia boss had almost lost hope. He had already paid each expert a handsome fee for their attempt, but he didn't care about money anymore. He needed results. The tension in the room was thick. Even the quiet hum of the air conditioner seemed loud. The experts wiped sweat from their brows and exchanged worried glances. Failure had a way of making even the most confident people feel small. Finally, after another long and fruitless attempt, the Mafia boss slammed his hand on the desk, startling everyone. He stood up, towering over the experts. "Enough," he said, his voice sharp. "You have failed, all of you. I can't wait any longer. If the safe isn't opened by tonight, everything we worked for will be at risk. I expected better from you. All of you." His words echoed in the room, making it feel colder, heavier. The experts tried to defend themselves. One said, "Sir, this safe is unlike anything we've seen. It's extremely advanced. There's almost no chance anyone could open it without a specific code." Another added, "We tried every possible method. If we had more time, we might succeed." But their words had no effect. The Mafia boss was not impressed. He had grown impatient, and fear had started to creep into his mind. Through it all, the maid quietly continued her work. She moved slowly, pretending to dust the nearby shelves, while her eyes remained on the safe. She had been thinking, observing, watching every move the experts made. She noticed the way they all relied on machines, how they ignored small details, and how they overcomplicated things. In her mind, she started forming a plan. It was simple, really, but simple was often overlooked by those who thought everything had to be complicated. Despite being quiet and humble, she had a confidence of her own. It wasn't loud or boastful, but it was steady. She knew that sometimes the simplest solution could solve the hardest problem. She wasn't a trained expert, but she was smart, careful, and patient. And most importantly, she was not distracted by ego or fear. The experts, meanwhile, packed up their tools one by one. Some left angrily, others with resignation, and a few even apologized to the Mafia boss. The room was emptying, leaving only the boss and a few remaining experts who were too proud to leave without trying one last time. The atmosphere was tense, quiet, and heavy. The safe remained untouched, unyielding, and almost mocking. The maid took a deep breath. She had made her decision. No one had asked her to try. No one expected her to try. But she could see what the experts could not. She could see the safe not as a problem that needed to be attacked with tools, but as a puzzle that needed to be understood. She started to move closer, her small hands ready, her eyes focused. She could feel her heart beating faster, but it wasn't fear. It was anticipation, excitement, and determination. She bent down slightly to get a better look at the safe. She examined the scratches, the dents, the slight misalignments, and the tiny details that the experts had overlooked. Every mark told a story. Every flaw suggested a possible way in. Her mind worked quickly but calmly. She started forming a plan of action in her head. It was a simple idea, but sometimes the simplest ideas were the most powerful. Meanwhile, the Mafia boss watched her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. "What are you doing?" he asked. "This is not your task. You are just a maid. Leave it to the experts." The maid looked up briefly but said nothing. She continued to study the safe, focused on the problem rather than the doubt around her. She knew that words were not needed, actions would speak louder. She took her time, checking every corner, every dial, and every small detail. Her movements were careful and precise, but there was a quiet confidence in them. The room grew silent. Even the remaining experts paused and watched her, unsure why someone so inexperienced and ordinary would even attempt such a task. Some shook their heads in disbelief, some laughed quietly, and some simply watched, thinking this was a waste of time. But the maid didn't mind. She focused only on the safe, observing, thinking, and preparing for her next move. As the day wore on, the shadows in the room grew longer. The golden light from the window shifted, illuminating the safe and highlighting tiny details in the metal. The maid noticed something small, a tiny notch near the lock that no one had touched or examined closely. Her eyes widened slightly as she realized this might be the clue the experts had missed. Her fingers itched to try, to see if her observation was correct. The Mafia boss leaned forward in his chair, watching silently. He could sense something different in her approach. There was no arrogance, no panic, no overcomplication. Just calm observation, quiet confidence, and patience. He didn't understand it yet, but he felt that perhaps this ordinary maid might be the last hope he had. And so, as the sun started to dip toward the horizon, the room held its breath. The maid, unnoticed by most until now, was preparing to attempt what 25 experts could not. She was ready to take the first step in what might be the most extraordinary moment in the mansion's history, and perhaps the most unexpected one as well. She knew that if she succeeded, it would change everything. But for now, she stayed calm, focused, and patient, preparing herself for the challenge that no one else could solve. Part 1 ended with the tension high, the safe still locked, and the Mafia boss silently hoping that perhaps, just perhaps, this quiet, observant maid might be the solution to a problem that seemed impossible. The story of courage, observation, and unexpected brilliance was only just beginning. The maid stood quietly in the corner, pretending to dust the shelves, but her mind was working faster than anyone else in the room. She had spent hours observing the experts, noticing what they did right and, more importantly, what they missed. While the experts relied heavily on complex tools and methods, she had learned that sometimes solutions were simple, hidden in the details that everyone else overlooked. Every scratch, dent, and misalignment on the safe told her a story. She studied each one, thinking, planning, and imagining what could be done. She noticed how the experts had been frustrated by the safe's complex mechanisms. They had tried brute force, advanced gadgets, and even unusual methods they had learned over years of experience. None of it worked. Their frustration had grown, and their confidence had faltered. Yet she stayed calm. Calmness, she thought, was the key. Fear and frustration clouded judgment. Patience allowed clarity. The maid took a step closer, her eyes scanning the safe slowly, deliberately. She paid attention to things that seemed insignificant. The slight looseness of a dial, the faint scratches near the edges, the tiny gap where the metal didn't perfectly align. It was easy to miss if someone was in a hurry or overconfident, but she wasn't in a hurry. Her only focus was observation. Her mind worked quietly, connecting patterns, testing ideas mentally before she tried anything. In the study, the remaining experts continued their work, but their methods were noisy and frantic. Tools clanged, laptops beeped, and calculators clicked. They argued with each other about the best approach, each convinced their way was correct. The Mafia boss watched impatiently, but he didn't speak. Deep down, he was beginning to notice something different about the maid. She wasn't loud. She didn't make mistakes. She didn't argue. She just observed. Hours passed as she quietly pieced together what the experts had overlooked. Every unsuccessful attempt by the professionals had taught her something. A dial that spun too far, a sequence that was skipped, a button that wasn't pressed in a certain order. These small details formed a map in her mind. She started imagining how the pieces fit together, how the mechanism inside might respond to careful handling rather than brute force. While she observed, she noticed a pattern in the scratches and tiny dents. It seemed as though the safe had been made with a particular weakness in mind, a small flaw that only a patient eye could catch. Her heart beat a little faster. She realized that this could be the key. It was subtle, almost invisible, and she doubted any of the experts had even noticed it. Their focus had been on complicated techniques, but she understood that simplicity often hid the solution. She took another careful step closer, crouching slightly to see the base of the safe. The faint light from the window illuminated a tiny notch near the lock, the kind of detail that could easily be overlooked. She reached out, her fingers trembling slightly but her mind steady. This was the moment she had been preparing for, though she didn't speak a word. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the occasional shuffle or sigh from the frustrated experts who still lingered. As she studied the notch, she realized it was not just a mark, it was a guide. The position, the angle, the small indentation all suggested a movement, a step that needed to be done carefully and in a certain order. She could see the way the mechanism inside might respond if handled with precision. This was the opportunity that the experts had missed because they were looking for a complex solution when the answer was right in front of them, simple but hidden. The Mafia boss leaned forward in his chair, watching her every move. He didn't understand what she was seeing or thinking, but he felt a shift in the air. There was something different about her approach. There was no panic, no overcomplication, no doubt. She was calm, focused, and deliberate. He felt a flicker of hope, something he hadn't felt since he first called the experts. Could it be possible that this quiet maid might succeed where 25 experts had failed? The maid continued to study the safe. She thought about the mistakes the experts had made. They had been in a rush, relying on their experience and gadgets, assuming that brute force and complicated methods would eventually succeed. But they had overlooked the obvious. She had learned that observation and patience were far more powerful than tools or knowledge alone. She moved her hand closer to the safe, careful not to touch the wrong part. Her fingers hovered over the tiny notch, feeling for the slight difference in texture, the subtle movement that would indicate the correct approach. She visualized how the internal mechanism might work, imagining how each small movement could trigger the next step. Her mind worked quickly, but she remained calm, making mental calculations and adjustments with each observation. The remaining experts, noticing her movements, paused and whispered among themselves. They couldn't understand why someone so inexperienced would even try. Some laughed quietly, others shook their heads, and a few stared in disbelief. They had years of experience, and yet here was a maid, calm and confident, focusing on a tiny detail they had all missed. Their pride made it hard for them to watch without judgment, but curiosity slowly replaced amusement. Could she really see something they didn't? The maid took a deep breath and adjusted her stance, preparing to make her first attempt. She didn't rush. She didn't second-guess herself. She trusted her observations and her understanding of the patterns she had seen. She remembered every failed attempt she had watched, every mistake, and every overlooked detail. Her mind was like a map, each small flaw and mark guiding her towards the solution. The Mafia boss watched her silently, his expression a mix of skepticism and intrigue. He had never seen anyone approach a problem like this. He had grown used to experts who relied on their reputation, their tools, and their confidence, only to fail when faced with something truly challenging. Yet this maid, quiet and unassuming, seemed to approach the problem with clarity and patience he hadn't expected. There was something remarkable in her calm determination, something that suggested she might succeed where others had failed. She leaned slightly closer to the safe, her eyes following the subtle lines and notches. She began to move her fingers carefully, testing small movements, feeling how the mechanism responded. Each movement was precise, deliberate, and controlled. She noticed the tiniest clicks and shifts, small indications that she was on the right track. The room was silent except for her quiet movements. The experts stopped their own attempts, watching silently, realizing that her approach was different. There was no guessing, no force, no overthinking. Just careful observation and patient testing. Even the Mafia boss, who had seen countless experts fail, could sense that something significant was happening. Minutes passed, each one filled with tension and anticipation. The maid remained focused, her eyes fixed on the safe, her mind analyzing every response and adjusting accordingly. She imagined the internal mechanisms, visualized the steps, and applied her observations with careful precision. Every small click, every slight movement confirmed that she was on the right path. Finally, she paused for a moment, taking another deep breath. She had formed a clear plan of action. She knew the exact steps she needed to take to unlock the safe. Her hands hovered over the lock, ready to begin. The room held its breath. The Mafia boss leaned forward, his eyes wide, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. Even the experts watched, unsure whether to believe what they were seeing. The maid's heart beat steadily, not with fear, but with anticipation. She felt a quiet excitement, knowing that her patience, observation, and careful thinking had led her to this moment. She was about to attempt what no one else could, guided by her own insight and understanding. And so, with careful hands and a clear mind, she prepared to make her move, ready to show that sometimes, the simplest approach, combined with sharp observation and patience, could solve the most complicated problems. The stage was set for something remarkable, and all eyes were now on the quiet maid who had seen what others could not. The story was only beginning, and the outcome would change everything. The maid took a deep breath and slowly extended her hands toward the safe. Every movement was calm, precise, and deliberate. She had watched the experts fail, analyzed the mistakes they made, and studied every detail of the safe. Now, she was ready to put her understanding into action. Her fingers hovered over the small notch she had discovered, feeling its shape, its subtle contours, and imagining how it connected to the mechanisms inside. She could feel her heartbeat, steady but excited, knowing this might be her one chance to succeed where 25 experts had failed. The room was silent, almost unbearably so. Even the Mafia boss, who usually spoke in sharp, commanding tones, remained quiet. He watched the maid closely, curious and skeptical, yet unable to look away. The remaining experts, who had lingered despite their repeated failures, had stopped all their own attempts. They were watching her, uncertain whether to laugh, to intervene, or to simply witness what seemed impossible. The air was thick with anticipation. With careful hands, she began to move the dial gently, testing the response of the internal mechanism. Each click, each small shift reassured her that she was on the right path. She remembered every failure she had seen, every error the experts had made, and avoided repeating them. Her movements were methodical, as if she were dancing with the safe, understanding its rhythm, responding to its subtle cues. The Mafia boss leaned forward in his chair, watching her intently. He had seen many people try to solve difficult problems, but none with such calm and focus. There was no panic, no overconfidence, no anger at mistakes, just careful observation and precise action. He felt a spark of hope, a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time. Perhaps this ordinary maid was the last chance he had to open the safe. The maid continued, moving slowly and deliberately. She pressed one button, then another, feeling the slight resistance and noticing how the internal mechanism responded. She adjusted her pressure, her angle, and the sequence of her movements based on the feedback she received. Unlike the experts who relied on tools and theory, she trusted her senses and her understanding of the small, real-world details. Minutes passed, each one stretching like hours. The remaining experts whispered among themselves, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. They had spent years learning, yet here was someone without training handling the safe with an intuition they did not possess. They began to realize that experience alone was not enough. Observation and patience were equally important. The maid's hands moved in a sequence she had planned carefully in her mind. She adjusted one small lever slightly, then pressed a hidden button, and turned the dial with delicate precision. The mechanism inside responded, making tiny, almost imperceptible sounds that confirmed her approach. Her focus intensified, blocking out all distractions. The whispers, the occasional cough, even the Mafia boss's gaze, all faded as she concentrated solely on the safe and its response. She remembered the scratches and dents she had noticed earlier. They were not just marks, they were guides. She traced them with her fingers, using them to predict how the mechanism would react to each movement. Her understanding of the safe's construction allowed her to navigate its complexity without forcing anything, without guessing, and without making unnecessary mistakes. Every action was intentional, based on careful observation and logical reasoning. The Mafia boss shifted slightly in his chair. He could feel the tension in the room, the focus emanating from the maid. He had grown used to failure, to disappointment, to experts leaving without results. Yet now there was a possibility that he had not considered, a possibility that an ordinary person, guided by observation and intuition, could succeed. It was both unsettling and intriguing. The maid's fingers found a tiny lever hidden near the base of the safe. It was subtle, almost invisible, and had been ignored by everyone else. She gently pulled it, and the dial above it moved slightly, confirming that her intuition was correct. A small smile appeared on her face, but she didn't relax. She knew the job was not done. She had to continue carefully, step by step, until the final mechanism yielded. She turned her attention to the main lock, noticing a faint resistance that suggested a delicate combination of movements. She adjusted the dial slightly, feeling for the internal click that would indicate progress. The mechanism responded, a faint sound that only she seemed to notice. Her heart raced slightly, not with fear, but with the excitement of discovery and the thrill of solving a problem that had defeated so many others. The remaining experts could hardly believe their eyes. They whispered to each other, trying to understand what she was doing. Some shook their heads, muttering under their breath, while others simply watched in silence. They had all tried everything they knew, yet this maid, with no specialized tools or advanced knowledge, was making progress. It was impossible, yet undeniably real. The maid moved to the next step, adjusting a small hidden dial that had been overlooked. Her hands were steady, her focus absolute. She tested the response, noted the feedback, and adjusted accordingly. Each tiny success gave her more confidence, but she remained humble and careful. She knew that one wrong move could undo all her progress. The Mafia boss leaned forward, his eyes wide. He could feel the tension in his chest, the anticipation, and the disbelief. He had seen many experts fail, but he had never imagined that someone like her could succeed. He realized that her success so far was not luck. It was the result of careful observation, patience, and courage. She was using her mind and her senses in a way that no one else had. The maid paused for a moment, reviewing her mental map of the safe. She considered the next step carefully, analyzing how each part interacted with the others. She visualized the mechanism inside, predicting how it would respond to her next movement. Then, with a deep breath, she executed the next sequence. The dial moved, the lock shifted slightly, and a faint click echoed through the room. She smiled quietly, knowing she was very close. The room was completely silent now. Even the experts had stopped whispering. The Mafia boss held his breath, leaning closer, his eyes fixed on her hands. He had never felt such suspense in his life. For the first time, he realized that brilliance could come from anywhere, that skill was not just in titles or experience, but in observation, focus, and courage. The maid continued her careful work, adjusting the dial and pressing buttons in a sequence she had planned. She tested each movement, ensuring that she did not force anything, did not rush, and did not make unnecessary mistakes. Each step brought her closer to the final goal. Her calm determination was almost magical, a sharp contrast to the frustrated chaos of the experts who had come before. Minutes felt like hours as she worked. Every movement had to be precise, every adjustment considered. The faint sounds of the mechanism inside guided her, confirming each correct step. She felt a quiet thrill, knowing that she was about to succeed where so many had failed. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She simply followed her understanding and instincts. The remaining experts could hardly believe what they were witnessing. They had spent years learning, trying every possible method, and yet here was someone without training handling the safe with an intuition they could not match. Slowly, their skepticism began to turn into awe. They whispered to each other, realizing that observation and patience could sometimes surpass experience and tools. The Mafia boss leaned forward, unable to look away. He felt hope, excitement, and disbelief all at once. He had seen many people fail, but this maid was different. She approached the problem with calm focus, guided by observation and understanding. He realized that perhaps, for the first time, the impossible was possible. Finally, the maid reached the last step. Her hands moved carefully, executing the sequence she had envisioned. She adjusted the final dial, pressed a hidden button, and turned the main lock gently. There was a small, almost imperceptible click, followed by a subtle shift in the mechanism. She knew she had done it. The safe, which had resisted 25 experts, was finally giving way. The Mafia boss and the remaining experts watched in stunned silence. They could hardly believe what they had just seen. An ordinary maid, guided by observation, patience, and courage, had succeeded where so many had failed. The room was filled with a quiet sense of amazement, a realization that brilliance could come from unexpected places. The maid smiled quietly, taking a deep breath. She didn't boast, she didn't celebrate. She simply stood, calm and humble, knowing that her careful observation and determination had led her to this moment. The story of failure and frustration that had filled the mansion for weeks was now ending, replaced by a moment of quiet triumph and unexpected brilliance. And so, the stage was set for the next part of the story, where the safe would finally reveal its secrets, and the Mafia boss would witness firsthand the extraordinary result of patience, observation, and courage. The final click echoed through the grand study, soft but unmistakable. The safe, which had resisted 25 experts, finally yielded. The maid's hands lingered for a moment on the lock, feeling the smooth give of the mechanism, confirming that the last step had worked. Her calm smile grew slightly as she realized she had done it. She had opened the impossible, solved the puzzle, and revealed the secrets hidden for so long. The room, which had been filled with tension and frustration, now held a stunned silence, broken only by the faint creak of the safe door swinging open. The Mafia boss leaned back in his chair, eyes wide with disbelief. He had seen the best minds struggle, fail, and leave empty-handed. He had grown accustomed to disappointment and the sense that this safe could never be opened. Yet here was a maid, someone he had overlooked, someone whose duties had been simple and quiet, standing before the safe, having done what experts could not. His jaw tightened, and he stared, speechless, as the reality sank in. The remaining experts froze in place, their mouths opening and closing as if trying to form words. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others simply stared. They had spent years learning their craft, solving difficult problems, and yet this young maid, who had no advanced tools or formal training, had succeeded where they had failed. They felt a mixture of awe, embarrassment, and confusion. Their pride had been built on skill and experience, but it was clear that careful observation, patience, and humility could sometimes surpass all of that. The maid, still calm and composed, reached inside the safe. Her fingers grazed the papers, the documents, and the valuable items carefully stored within. She lifted them gently, not rushing, not flinching, but with a quiet confidence that spoke of her understanding. She knew the value of what she had uncovered, not just in monetary terms but in importance to the Mafia boss and the stakes that had been riding on this moment. She stepped back slightly, holding the contents of the safe so that the Mafia boss could see them. He leaned forward, his eyes scanning the papers, checking the documents, verifying their authenticity. The corners of his mouth twitched, a hint of surprise breaking through his stern expression. He had expected someone to try and fail again, perhaps with the same frustration he had witnessed countless times over the weeks. But this was different. This was success, clean and undeniable. The experts remained silent, some averting their gaze, others still trying to process what had happened. They had prided themselves on their knowledge and techniques, and yet this success had come from someone who had not relied on anything they had considered essential. No complicated tools, no advanced machinery, no formulas or theories. Just observation, careful thinking, and patience. The maid had seen what they had overlooked, understood what they had ignored, and acted when it mattered most. The Mafia boss slowly rose from his chair. His eyes remained fixed on the maid, a mix of astonishment, respect, and perhaps a touch of humility reflected in his expression. He had underestimated her. He had assumed her role as a maid meant she could only observe, clean, and follow instructions, but he had been proven wrong. The safe had opened, the documents were secure, and it was all thanks to her quiet determination and sharp mind. He approached her slowly, each step deliberate, unsure how to respond. He had expected failure, confrontation, and perhaps even excuses. Instead, he found himself facing calm competence and extraordinary skill in someone he had never given much thought to. He stopped a few feet away from her and spoke, his voice lower than usual, tinged with a mix of wonder and respect. "I cannot believe this. I have seen 25 experts fail, and yet you have opened it in a single attempt." The maid looked up briefly, maintaining her composure. She spoke softly but clearly, her tone humble. "I watched, sir. I saw what everyone else missed." The answer was in the details, in the small signs that others overlooked. "I only followed them carefully, step by step." The Mafia boss nodded slowly, taking in her words. It was true. He had witnessed the experts rely on complicated methods and tools, and they had failed because they had ignored the obvious. This maid, quiet, observant, and patient, had noticed the subtleties and used them to her advantage. He felt a newfound respect for her, realizing that intelligence and capability were not always tied to titles or experience. The remaining experts shuffled uncomfortably. Their pride stung but their amazement undeniable. They had underestimated the maid, and the lesson was clear. Skill was important, but so was observation, humility, and the ability to think simply and clearly. Some of them approached cautiously, nodding slightly, acknowledging her success without needing to speak. It was an unspoken recognition of her achievement, and a quiet admission that she had outperformed them in a way that none of them had anticipated. The maid placed the contents of the safe on the table, arranging them neatly so that the Mafia boss could inspect everything. She did not rush, did not fumble, and did not act as though she were showing off. Her movements were calm, controlled, and confident, reflecting the steady thought and careful observation that had brought her this far. Each document, each item was handled with care, showing her respect for the importance of what had been entrusted to her. The Mafia boss picked up a few documents, examining them closely. His eyes flicked back and forth, taking in the details, confirming that everything was as it should be. His hands shook slightly, a mixture of relief and astonishment evident in his movements. He had faced failure repeatedly, but now, thanks to this Maid, he had the assurance that the secrets were safe and that the problem he thought impossible had been solved. He turned slightly toward the remaining experts. His gaze was firm, and his voice carried weight. You all failed because you overlooked the details. You relied on tools, knowledge, and methods that, while impressive, missed the subtle clues that were right in front of you. This young woman succeeded because she paid attention, remained calm, and thought carefully about every step. That is the difference. The experts remained silent, some nodding slowly, others looking down, realizing the truth of his words. They had been too focused on their methods, their experience, and their assumptions. The Maid had succeeded by combining careful observation with patience and humility. It was a lesson none of them would soon forget. The Maid stepped back slightly, allowing the Mafia boss to continue his inspection. She did not seek praise or recognition. She had completed the task she set out to do, and that was enough for her. Her mind was still calm, still focused, ready to handle whatever came next. But for now, she allowed the room to absorb the impact of her success. The Mafia boss finally looked up at her, a small smile breaking through his stern expression. You have done something extraordinary. You have opened a safe that has resisted every expert I have called. And you did it with patience, careful observation, and clear thinking. I cannot thank you enough. The Maid nodded slightly, her expression humble. She had not expected praise, only the chance to do what she could. Her focus had always been on understanding the problem, on acting carefully, and on solving what others could not. The recognition from the Mafia boss was unexpected, but she accepted it quietly, with the same calm dignity that had guided her throughout. The room remained quiet for a few moments, the weight of what had occurred settling in. The experts, once confident and proud, now stood humbled, witnessing the power of simple, focused intelligence. The Mafia boss, usually stern and unyielding, had experienced a moment of awe and respect that was rare for him. And the Maid, calm, observant, and capable, had become the center of a remarkable achievement, demonstrating that courage, patience, and clear thinking could overcome even the most daunting challenges. The safe, now open, stood as a testament to her skill. The documents, carefully handled, held the secrets that had caused so much tension and frustration. The Mafia boss picked up a few papers, examining them carefully, ensuring everything was intact. He could feel relief washing over him, along with a deep respect for the person who had solved what he had thought impossible. The experts shuffled quietly, some murmuring apologies, others simply acknowledging her success with a nod. They had learned a valuable lesson that day. Experience alone did not guarantee success, and sometimes the solution could come from the most unexpected place. Observation, patience, humility, and courage were as important as knowledge and skill. The Maid stepped back, her role complete for now. She had opened the safe, revealed its contents, and demonstrated the power of careful observation and thoughtful action. The room, once filled with tension and frustration, now held a quiet sense of admiration and respect. The Mafia boss, still inspecting the documents, realized that he had witnessed something extraordinary, something that would be remembered far longer than the frustration of the failed attempts. And so, the story reached a turning point. The safe, which had defied the best experts, had been opened by a quiet, humble maid who had relied on her observation, patience, and courage. The Mafia boss had seen firsthand the remarkable result of her actions, and the experts had learned a lesson in humility and insight. The stage was now set for the final part of the story, where recognition, reward, and reflection would complete this remarkable tale. The room was quiet, filled with a mix of relief, awe, and admiration. The safe, which had resisted 25 experts, now lay open, its contents revealed and intact. The Mafia boss carefully placed the papers and documents on the desk, inspecting each one to ensure nothing was missing. His face was a mixture of surprise and respect. He had seen the impossible achieved by someone he had underestimated, someone whose role in the house he had assumed was ordinary and simple. The maid stood nearby, calm and humble, her hands folded in front of her, observing his inspection. The Mafia boss finally turned to her, his expression softening. "You have done something extraordinary," he said quietly, almost in disbelief. "I have called the best experts, the most skilled minds, and all of them failed. Yet you, with patience, careful observation, and intelligence, have accomplished what seemed impossible. I owe you my gratitude." The maid bowed her head slightly. She did not speak loudly, did not boast. Her pride was quiet, internal, born of the satisfaction of completing a difficult task. She had not done it for recognition or reward. She had done it because she saw a problem, studied it, and solved it. Yet, the Mafia boss's words were sincere, and they carried weight. They acknowledged her skill, her patience, and her courage in a world that often overlooked quiet intelligence. The experts, still in the room, shuffled uncomfortably. Their pride had been wounded, their expertise overshadowed by someone they had underestimated. Some murmured apologies, others gave small nods of acknowledgement. They had learned a lesson they would not forget. Sometimes the most unlikely person could succeed where experience and tools had failed. Observation, humility, patience, and courage were qualities that could surpass even years of training and expertise. The Mafia boss looked around the room at the group of experts. "Take note of this," he said firmly. "It is not always the tools, the gadgets, or the titles that make someone capable. It is attention, understanding, and careful thought. Today, this young woman has taught us all something invaluable." The maid remained calm, letting the moment sink in. She had proven herself not by force or skill alone, but by quiet intelligence. She had observed, understood, and acted, using her own mind rather than relying on anything external. It was a lesson in humility for all present, a reminder that brilliance could be found in unexpected places. The Mafia boss turned his full attention back to her. "You have my respect and my gratitude," he said. "I underestimated you because of your role in this house. That was my mistake. You have shown me that intelligence and courage are not measured by position or title. You have proven that the simplest approach, guided by patience and observation, can solve even the most complex problems." He walked closer, offering a gesture of recognition that was rare from someone as stern and formidable as he was. He handed her a small envelope. Inside was a reward, not just in monetary terms, but a symbol of trust and acknowledgement. It was a recognition of her skill and her extraordinary accomplishment. The maid accepted it quietly, nodding in thanks, her eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and humility. She did not seek praise, yet she understood the importance of this acknowledgement. The remaining experts had gathered near the doorway, some still silent, others speaking quietly among themselves. They were discussing the events of the day, trying to reconcile their understanding of expertise with what they had just witnessed. Many realized that knowledge alone was not enough. Observation, patience, and a willingness to see what others ignored were equally important. They had learned a valuable lesson, one that would stay with them for the rest of their careers. The maid, meanwhile, stepped back from the desk, her role in the immediate task complete. She had opened the safe, revealed its contents, and demonstrated the power of careful observation, patience, and intelligence. She had shown that courage and humility could achieve what pride and experience sometimes could not. The room, once filled with tension and frustration, now held a quiet sense of admiration and respect. The Mafia boss looked around the room once more, his gaze resting on the maid. "From this day forward," he said, "your skills and insight are recognized. You have earned my trust, my respect, and my gratitude. You have reminded us all of the power of careful thought and observation." He gestured to the safe and the documents. "Everything is secure. The secrets we have guarded for so long are now safe, thanks to your actions. This day will be remembered, not just for the success of opening the safe, but for the lesson it taught us all about intelligence, humility, and courage. The maid nodded, quietly acknowledging his words. She felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond recognition or reward. She had faced a challenge that seemed impossible, studied it carefully, and succeeded where experts had failed. The satisfaction was deep and lasting, a confirmation of the value of patience, observation, and courage. As the day wore on, the mood in the mansion shifted. The tension and frustration that had filled the study for weeks began to fade, replaced by a sense of relief and admiration. The experts, once so confident and proud, had learned humility and the importance of careful observation. The Mafia boss, often stern and unyielding, had learned a lesson in recognition and respect. And the maid, quiet and capable, had proven that intelligence and courage could come from the most unexpected sources. The maid returned to her duties, but now with a quiet confidence. She had been recognized and rewarded, yes, but more importantly, she had proven to herself and to others that careful thought, observation, and patience were powerful tools. The room, the safe, and the documents were now symbols of her success and a reminder to all that brilliance often lies in the details, in patience, and in the courage to act when others hesitate. The Mafia boss remained in his study, occasionally glancing at the documents, still amazed at what had occurred. He had learned a valuable lesson about underestimating others and the power of observation and patience. The experts slowly left the room, humbled but enlightened, carrying with them a story they would never forget. The maid continued her work in the mansion, but her presence was now different. She was no longer just a quiet observer. She had proven her value and earned respect through her intelligence, courage, and patience. Her success had changed the atmosphere of the house, showing that determination, careful thought, and humility could achieve the extraordinary. As the day came to a close, the safe remained open, the documents secure, and the lesson clear. Sometimes the simplest approach, guided by observation, patience, and courage, could solve the most difficult problems. The maid had proven this beyond doubt. She had cracked the impossible, earned respect, and left an indelible mark on everyone in the mansion. Her story would be remembered, not just for opening the safe, but for showing the power of intelligence, humility, and determination in a world that often overlooked quiet brilliance. And so, the story concluded with a sense of fulfillment, recognition, and inspiration. The Mafia boss had seen the impossible achieved, the experts had learned humility and insight, and the maid had demonstrated the extraordinary power of observation, patience, and courage. The mansion, once filled with tension and frustration, now held a quiet respect for the maid whose intelligence and calm determination had solved what no one else could. The legacy of her actions would be remembered for years to come, a testament to the idea that brilliance often comes from unexpected places, and that patience, courage, and careful thought can overcome even the most daunting challenges.